Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Feel free to ask me questions during this talk. I'm going to discuss modeling science. Science is in italics. I'm talking about the journal Science here. This is joint work with John Lafferty. So let me get rid of that guy. Okay, so this project, we are modeling 120 years of science. So our data are Science magazine from 1880 to 2002, which is courtesy of JSTOR. I don't know if you're all familiar with JSTOR. It's a nonprofit organization that takes original bound volumes, scans them, and then runs optical character recognition on the resulting scans and puts their entire collection online as a resource for scholars and for students. It's very useful. And they've given us their entire collection of the journal Science, which results in about 130,000 documents and 76 million words. Okay. So our goal in this work is to automatically discover a latent thematic structure in this collection that's useful for doing things like browsing and searching and assessing the similarity between documents. The challenge here is that, or there are two challenges. One is that these latent themes evolve with science, that we can't treat the data as exchangeable the way one normally does in a topic model. And two, that the latent themes are correlated. So the occurrence of a topic like geology might indicate the likely occurrence of another topic about, say, meteorology more so than genetics. And so we want to capture this intertopic correlation as well as topic drift through time. Okay, so to begin with, I want to talk a little bit about topic models in general. So topic models are hierarchical probabilistic models of text where we use multinomial distributions over the vocabulary called topics to describe a collection, some small set of them. And these are useful for lots of different kinds of things. So for example, you can automatically discover topics in a collection of documents like this. One can use topic models to annotate images automatically so given an image by itself, predict this caption. What I'll talk.
Color you didn't have 100 years ago.
That's right. We'll talk about today about finding trends in these topics through time, and also these connections between topics. So what a hierarchical model is hierarchical modeling has become a real mainstay in modern machine learning research. And the idea is that we take our data and we treat it as observations that come from some generative probabilistic process that includes some hidden structure that we can't observe. And the goal is to, well, I'll say the goal in the next slide. So for example, in a document collection, that hidden structure are the themes or the ideas that pervade the corpus that we can't observe just by looking at all the documents in a big bag. And so the goal in hierarchical modeling is posterior inference, to infer that hidden structure based on the observed data. For example, given all my documents, what are the topics that best describe the collection? And moreover, we want to situate new data into the estimated model. So if I create a model of science, when I take a new article in Science that just came out, I want to ask how is this situate in my larger corpus that I've learned my topic model from. This is the idea behind topic modeling. Okay, so let's begin by just quickly going over latent Dirichlet allocation. So latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA, is a topic model, and this will give you an idea of kind of the process of hierarchical modeling. The idea is that we have a simple intuition, which is that documents exhibit multiple topics. Okay, so here's a document, Seeking Life's Bare Genetic Necessities, and this is about, this is so nice, it's hard. Yeah, you can never do this. I shouldn't touch it. This is about determining automatically how many genes an organism needs to survive. Okay? And what I've done here, just to kind of illustrate this intuition, is highlighted manually some words in this article. I've highlighted words like genes and genomes in yellow. These are words about genetics. Words like organisms or survive or life, words about evolutionary biology, I highlighted those in pink. And words like computer analysis and computational, words about data analysis, I've highlighted in blue. And so the intuition is that every document in the collection exhibits multiple topics in this way. There's some set of topics out there, and each document has words from some of them. So what we want to do is translate that intuition into a generative probabilistic model. Dream up an imaginary process by which this data arose that uses this hidden structure, and then we're going to reverse that process to infer it. So here's the generative process. So forget the article for now. Imagine we start out by just choosing at random a distribution over topics. So imagine that there are these topics out there somewhere. Each one corresponds to a different distribution over the vocabulary. And we're going to start by just choosing a random distribution over topics for this document. So if we have 50 topics, then there are 50 topics here along the x-axis, and we've randomly chosen this document to be about the blue topic, the yellow topic, and the pink topic. Okay? Now remember, each of those topics corresponds to a distribution over words. So then to generate each word of the article, what we do is we first choose a topic at random from this distribution, this per document topic distribution. So say we chose the yellow topic. And then we look up which distribution over words the yellow topic corresponds to, and we draw a word from that distribution. So here we've drawn the word genetic from the yellow topic. Excuse me. And similarly, here we chose the blue topic, and we draw the word predictions. And here we choose the pink topic, and we drew the word organism. And we repeat this for every word in the document. Okay, this is the imaginary process. So we imagine that this thing that we observed arose from this process. And the goal, of course, in reality, we only observe this thing, the document itself. And so our goal is to then infer the underlying topic structure from the observations. In other words, what are the topics? What are the different distributions over words that generated my collection? And how are the documents divided according to those topics? What is this decomposition here for each of the documents in my collection? That's the idea. Okay. So before getting into more details, I want to just quickly review, I know I don't need to, the semantics of graphical models for you. So a graphical model is a graph that represents a joint probability distribution between in an ensemble of random variables. And nodes are random variables. Edges denote possible dependence between random variables. The observed variables are shaded, and unobserved variables or hidden variables are unshaded. Okay, so this is the representation of a dependency structure between an ensemble of random variables. And I'm going to make heavy use of this plate notation, where this kind of replication that we're going to see a lot in these document models, this kind of replication can be shorthand by putting a box around x and a number there and an index on x. Okay, so this is a graphical model. And like I said, the structure of this graph defines the pattern of dependence between the random variables. So for example, this graph here corresponds to this joint distribution where y comes independent of everything else, and then each x is independent conditioned on y. All right, this is a typical conditional independence assumption, and it's represented by this graphical model. Okay. So this model that I just described for you, the latent Dirichlet allocation model, as a graphical model, that process that I just described can be illustrated like this. Okay, let me just unpack this figure for you. So notice the only thing we observe is WDN. That's the nth word in the dth document. Okay, so for each document in science, we know all capital N words, and we have that set of words for every document in all of science. Okay, so that's these two plates. The N plate is the replication of words in a document, and the D plate is replication of documents in a collection. Okay, so this is what we observe, and everything else is the hidden structure that we're assuming lives in our corpus. Okay, and what is that hidden structure? Well, again, first, we choose our topics. So these betas are distributions over words. So the first thing we do is we choose k of them. Let's say k is 50 topics. Some of these are going to correspond to genetics. Some of these are going to correspond to computational analysis. Some of them are going to correspond to evolutionary biology, geology, and so on. And then we choose our corpus by, for each document, that's this D plate, choosing a distribution over those 50 topics. This was that cartoon histogram that I had in the figure. And then for each word, choosing a topic index from this distribution. This was choosing the blue coin or the pink coin. And then looking up which distribution over words the pink coin is associated with and choosing the word from that distribution. Okay, notice that W is dependent on Z and on beta. I have a thing. Yeah, so W is dependent on the topic index that came from this histogram and the particular distribution over words. And also notice that these distributions over words, which we call topics, exist outside of the entire collection. The whole collection is generated from the same distribution over words, but each document inside this D plate is drawn from a different distribution over topics. That's a key idea. Yeah?
So you need to specify the number of topics ahead of time?
Yes.
So it's not an Indian update process or something?
No, not in this case.
Could you rephrase the question for the people on the broadcast?
The question was, so do you have to specify K in advance, or is it some kind of non-parametric Bayesian method that we're using? And the answer is, for this model, we specify K in advance, yes. But one could employ non-parametric Bayesian priors here. OK, so that's the generative process, exactly as I described before. And again, the idea is, from a collection of documents, to infer all of the latent variables. Infer the per-word topic assignments. These were the colors that I shaded the words in. Infer the per-document topic proportions. This is the cartoon histogram that I drew. And most interestingly, infer the per-corpus topic distributions. These are the distributions over words that represent things like genetics and geology, but we don't know them in advance. And then you can use the posterior expectations of these hidden variables to perform your task at hand. For example, information retrieval, document similarity, and so on. And this kind of technique can be used in a lot of different applications. OK, so computing this posterior is intractable, but you can appeal to approximate posterior inference. And there's many ways that you can do this. You can use mean field variational methods, expectation propagation, Gibbs sampling, or something I'm very excited about. E.Y. Tay has done this new collapsed variational inference method that I highly recommend you read, which kind of combines the best of mean field variational methods and collapsed Gibbs sampling. It's a very accurate variational technique. OK, so let's see an example of this at work. So in this example, we just took 10 years of science from 1990 to 2000. And we took a 100-topic LDA model using variational inference. So we said, OK, there are 100 topics in these 10 years of science. Let's look at what they are. OK, and here is that article we saw before, Seeking Life's Bare Genetic Necessities. And when you run posterior inference on it, so I should say this article was not in the original collection. So we didn't estimate our topics using this article. But we can say this was a new article in Science. We can say, OK, given this article, what is our estimate of the topics that combine to form it? That's that histogram. So now that histogram is no longer a cartoon. We can take this document and a model and ask, what is the topic proportions for this document? And you get a picture like this. And so you can see in the 100 topics, a handful of them are somewhat activated, not all of them. Moreover, we can then look at the words with highest probability in each of these topics and get a sense of what they mean. And when we do that, when we look at the top topics in this histogram, we see words about genetics, words about evolutionary biology, words about diseases, because the article's about organisms surviving, and words about computer analysis.
So are those the most common words, or have you taken out words that are common to all the topics?
Well, as a pre-processing step, we took out all the stop words. Those would otherwise have propagated to the top of these lists. But these are the words with highest probability with these topics.
So why take out the stop words? Why not model them and then just show us like lift or something like that here?
That would be fine, but computationally, if you take out the stop words, you've removed 50% of your corpus. And since they don't add anything for this kind of analysis, it seems OK. But yeah, you don't need to do that. You could keep the stop words in and then look at the words that most differentiate this topic from the others and find the same kinds of lists. Other questions? Yeah.
So these are bag of words models. They don't depend on the order of the words in the document.
Yeah, that's a great point. So in my generative process, there was nothing about the order of words in the documents. And so this actually makes this assumption that the words are exchangeable, that if I saw the words of this article in a totally in a total gibberish order, my assessment of its probability would be exactly the same. And that, of course, makes no sense from the linguistic perspective, but for kind of assessing the coarse topical or thematic structure of a collection, it's a reasonable assumption to make and helps with both computation and learning all of these parameters from this amount of data. You know, there's a huge number of parameters here, and so adding assumptions like that really explodes that number. That's a good point, though. And there's been work since this on relaxing that assumption and building LDA models of sequences for use in other applications. Okay. Okay, so that was kind of a review of LDA. LDA is a powerful model for visualizing the hidden thematic structure in a large collection and for generalizing new data and how it fits into that structure. From the statistical perspective, LDA is what's called a mixed membership model. It's like a mixture model, except that each data point can actually belong to multiple mixture components through these latent topic proportions theta. And this, for document collections and other kinds of heterogeneous data that's grouped, this is a more appropriate assumption than a simple finite mixture, which clusters each document into a single topic. Now, the graphical models formalism is very powerful. It's modular, and so it can be embedded in more complicated models, and that's what I'm going to show you in the next part of the talk. And it's general, so the data generating distribution here can be changed. If I go, oh, I'm using this. This link from, so W depends on Z, which determines which beta it comes from ultimately, and this link from beta to W could be a Gaussian, could be Poisson, could be whatever you want, and a lot of the same machinery for doing approximate posterior inference still goes through. And so this model has been adapted to images and to genetic data and so on. Okay. And finally, variational inference is fast, and this is what allows us to analyze these large data sets. And if you want to play with this model, you can download some C code on my website and analyze your own document collections that way, or other collections of things. Okay, any other questions before we kind of move on? All right. Okay. Now we mentioned that, like you brought up, LDA assumes that words within a document are exchangeable. Okay, and you can kind of see this when you see this tree structure in a graphical model. That's what that implies. Now, moreover, LDA assumes that documents in a collection are exchangeable because we have that same kind of tree structure from the outside of the D plate to the inside of the D plate. Meaning, if I take all my articles and I scramble them, the probability of those articles under a particular model stays exactly the same. The model is just as good a fit. And this is very restrictive, particularly for the data that we're trying to analyze here, which is science from 1880 to 2002. Here's an example. Documents about the same topic really are not exchangeable in this setting. Here's an article called Instantaneous Photography from 1890. It's a nice article. And here's an article called Infrared Reflectance in Leaf-Sitting Neotropical Frogs from 1977. Now, both of these articles discuss the science of photography. But in 1890, the words that we used to describe photography were totally different. They came from a totally different vocabulary than the words that we used in 1977 to discuss taking pictures of these frogs. So what we want to do is extend this model that takes this into account. That still, somehow we would still say these are both about photography, but an LDA type model won't associate these with the same topic because they use totally different words. The words don't even necessarily get used at the same time, the words about photography from 1890 and about photography in 1977. Okay, so the idea is to build a dynamic topic model where we're going to divide our corpus into sequential slices, for example, by year. We're going to assume that each slice's documents are exchangeable. So we're going to assume that in 1890, okay, I have all the articles in science, but the articles of science from 1890, I can scramble those and their probability stays the same. Seems like a reasonable assumption. But I can't, the articles from 1890 must precede the articles from 1977 in my model. Each one is drawn from an LDA model, and the topic distributions are what evolves from slice to slice. So I have 50 topics, and they have some distributions over words in 1890, and then in 1891, they evolve a little bit. I don't know why I'm doing this with my hands, I think the next, yeah, here we go. So this is the picture. Now you recognize, so each vertical slice of this graphical model is a year. Okay? And you can recognize that as the same LDA model we just discussed, where here are the K topics, and here are the documents being generated by those K topics. Okay? Now, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that from each year to year, we have these topics in a chain. So the fifth topic, beta K2, at year 2 depends on the fifth topic at year 1. But it's still a different random variable. It's not the same value. I'll explain what distribution we put on it in a second. And this goes forward from 1880 to 2002. Okay, so is this clear? The generative process here is start at year 1, generate the documents, evolve all the topics to year 2, generate the documents, evolve the topics to year 3, and so on. But the goal is the same. Take this big representation of the same data and infer all of the hidden variables. Instead of just inferring 50 topics, infer 50 sequences of topics where each sequence describes a single topic changing over the 120 years.
And this H beta Ki, that's a multinomial?
Well, kind of, yeah. I'm going to describe it in a bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's right. This somehow needs to be a multinomial or at least turn into a multinomial along this arc, which is what it does. Yeah. Yeah.
If I were to actually generate a document from one of these individual components, where does the length factor come in?
We're assuming that the length of each article is given here as n. So this
So
doesn't...
for it's fine, but for generating from the distribution.
For generating from the distribution, yeah, you might want to put a distribution on n or fix n. Yeah. Okay. So the challenge here, though, is that these topics, like you mentioned, are multinomial distribution parameters. So they are points on the simplex of v dimensions, which could be very high, like 20,000. And how do you represent a distribution of simplicial points that change through time? And the key is to use something from 1980 called the logistic normal distribution. And the logistic normal distribution is a simple idea. Basically take a multivariate normal and draw from it, and then exponentiate the resulting vector and renormalize it so it sits on the simplex. Okay? So you draw from a multivariate normal and you get a vector of length k of real values. They might be positive or negative. So what you do is you simply exponentiate that vector to make it all positive and then renormalize it so that it sums to 1 and sits on the simplex. Now why is this nice? Well, it's nice because now we can describe a random variable that sits on the simplex in terms of a Gaussian random variable. And Gaussian random variables we know how to deal with in a chain. We simply put a state space model on them. So the idea, it's kind of funny notation. I shouldn't have used beta. It's confusing. But basically, beta now is these log probabilities. So beta tk, in 1880, topic 1, given in 1879, topic 1, is a normal whose mean is the value at 1879. Okay? And then the probability of a word given that value is this expression, which is essentially that process of exponentiating and remapping to the simplex. Okay, so in other words, these betas are Gaussian random variables now, and this arc exponentiates and maps them to the simplex in order to draw our multinomial values from those Gaussian random variables. Is that clear? Okay. Okay, so again, our goal is to compute this big posterior distribution, all the topics for all time, all of the topic proportions for all time and all documents, and all of the topic assignments for all time and all documents, given all that we ever have, which are our documents. And again, exact inference is impossible here for many, many reasons, at the least because each vertical slice is an LDA model and exact inference there is impossible. And moreover, doing something like Gibbs sampling, Markov chain Monte Carlo, is not practical for the amount of data we have. This is the real reason to appeal to variational inference. Remember before, we only were looking at 10 years of data, and now we're looking at the whole 120-year history, 76 million words. So again, our solution is to use variational inference.
Is that more of a mixing problem or just a computation?
be okay?
Well, actually, there's a couple issues. Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a couple issues. First, yes, it's a problem of the amount of data, and just running one iteration of MCMC would be hard. But two, when in LDA, MCMC is good because you can use Gibbs sampling. You can integrate out all of the latent variables except for Z. But here you can't do that because, you see, this arc is not conjugate. The logistic normal is not conjugate to the multinomial the way the Dirichlet is, and that's what lets you do all that integration out analytically. And so you'd have to do some kind of Metropolis-Hastings step here, and then that you need to calibrate. And so it just gets upsetting all around. Okay.
And it might not mix as well.
And it might not mix, right.
You couldn't even get to that point to know whether we would.
Right, right. I mean, so the not mixing thing is interesting. In terms of deciding between variational methods and MCMC, somehow with MCMC you're guaranteed that you will eventually be drawing samples from your true posterior, but you have no idea how to assess the convergence. And in variational, you know how to assess the convergence because you have a very specific objective function that you're minimizing. However, you have no idea how close it is to the true posterior. So you're you're hosed either way in a sense, but variational is faster. Yeah.
Doesn't the lack of conjugacy also make it harder to use exponential, the standard variational techniques?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I think I have a slide about what we did, but if not, I'll just say it later. Yeah. Okay. No, I don't have a slide, but I'll say it here. Okay, so at the end of the talk, if you want details, I have some slides about what variational methods is, but to get through all this stuff, I want to just kind of summarize it here. The idea with variational methods is that, okay, remember, we're looking for the posterior distribution, the distribution of the latent variables given the observations. So the idea with variational methods is we define a family of distributions on those latent variables that's indexed by some free variational parameters, some parameters that we're going to get to play with. And then we fit those variational parameters to be as close as possible in this KL divergence to the true posterior. So here P is the true posterior, and Q is this new family of distributions that we can play with through these parameters. And this happens to be an objective function that we can compute and optimize. Okay, and there's some references here for variational methods. So to answer your question, right, normally akin to this Gibbs sampling trick, when you can integrate things out, things also are nice and easy in the variational side. You can do these analytic updates and this coordinate descent. And here you can't do that because of the non-conjugacy. So what we do is we still do coordinate descent for some of the variational parameters, the ones that deal with the conjugate pairs, but for specifically, oh, actually, now I think I might have a slide about it. No, I don't. Okay. But specifically for the beta parameters, what we actually did was use an optimization procedure, use conjugate gradient. And the particular variational family that we posed there is a Kalman filter, which is conjugate. So we basically posed a Kalman filter with observations that are Gaussian, and those are the variational parameters. And so then you find the observations such that the resulting posterior is closest in KL to the true posterior that you care about. So there's actually a Kalman filter fitting procedure happening within the variational inference.
Kalman filters coming because we're working with Gaussian.
Yes, yes, yes. A simple Gaussian state space model with Gaussian observations. There are details about that at the end of the talk.
Did you consider using variational as proposal distributions for fits?
No, no, we should try that, yeah.
Did you go, no, it's not going to work for a reason X and not do it, or just did?
We just didn't, no, we didn't think of it, yeah. But whenever I talk about this to statisticians, this gets suggested. And I think that there was a paper about doing that a while ago with Nando and Mike, and that it didn't, with Nando and Michael Jordan, and that it didn't necessarily work well, but that would be worth exploring here. Yeah. Okay, so again, we're going to work with the JSTOR data. And I didn't mention this before. This JSTOR data, there's no reliable punctuation, metadata, or references. So this structure that we're discovering is structure that you couldn't get otherwise, but that JSTOR really wants for its users. We restrict ourselves to 30,000 terms in the vocabulary, those terms that occurred more than 10 times. And our data are 76 million words, again, in 130,000 documents.
Is that actually after you've done this?
Pruning, yes. Yes. Okay, so again, let's play the same game that we did before and see what new comes out. So here's another article called Sequencing the Genome Fast. This is in our training set. And this is about the technology that was developed in order to sequence the genome fast. And again, we can do posterior inference and look at the expected topic proportions here. And you can see a handful of these are activated. And again, we can look at the top few, and we can see that they correspond to things like genetics and genome and genetic sequencing, things like devices, and things like data and data analysis. Okay, but now we can do a bit more. We can take one of these topics, like the devices topics, and we can ask, what was that topic like 75 years ago? Okay, so we can say that's a distribution over words, and it's in the 2001 slice. If I back that up, what did that distribution of words look like over time? And you can see that over time, it kind of starts with words like electric, machine, power, engine, steam, iron, battery, and wire. And it ends with things like device, devices, current, gate, silicon, technology. And midway through, tubes plays a role in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and so on. Now, we have one of these for every year. I'm just showing you every 10 years. And so this gives you an interesting window through which to look at this data that, again, has really no structure. I mean, JSTOR has 130,000 articles. They're organized by volume and number, and that's it. But we're finding this structure automatically, which could be used by people to explore this kind of collection or this kind of data. And you can imagine that you could use this with query logs or with email archives or with all kinds of things that don't necessarily have structure built into them like this.
But you don't really have any way for topics to split or merge,
Right,
right?
that's something we'd like to work on. It's a problem, especially with things like biology, where they kind of start out all together, but then there's significant factions split, and there's no way of modeling that here. Yeah. Now, moreover, we can take a topic and we can look at particular words within it and ask, how did those words, how did their relative probability change over time? And so you can see here, I put them in quotes because, of course, we don't have anything marked up as theoretical physics, but this topic that seemed to correspond to theoretical physics, you can see words like relativity peaking in the 30s and dissipating, and words like laser increasing. And here in neuroscience, we have the word nerve losing probability while the word neuron increases in probability. And the word oxygen peaks kind of in the 60s. And I was confused about this, and you can kind of probe into this phenomena. And basically, there were all these articles in the 60s about depriving people of oxygen and seeing how it affected their thinking. And so that's thankfully now less popular than it used to be.
So this one, the oxygen is actually more interesting than the relativity, because presumably just the word relativity without having categories would have
Yes.
the same peak, whereas oxygen may be more popular now than it ever was, but not in the context of neuroscience.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, and I've been trying to think of an example of that, and it's been staring me in the face. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So just looking at marginal word counts wouldn't give you the same kind of structure. This should also point out a limitation of this model, something else that I'd like to do, to work on or fix, which is that relativity wasn't invented until somewhere around here, but the model needs to account for its massive probability in the 30s, and so it ramps it up in this way. And so you don't want to read too much into these things because, this is giving relativity some kind of positive force even before anybody ever thought of it. So I want to stress the kind of caution with which to interpret these. It's
what you're saying is like it assumes that relativity had some non-zero probability in 1900 because it needed to explain
exactly
its frequency in 1925.
Precisely. And there's a variance term on this drift, this Gaussian drift, and it's small, and so it in order to deal with it, it says, oh, I'm going to put its posterior probability up there. And so, yeah, you need to be cautious. These provide interesting brainstorms for what might be happening, but it's important to go back and look at the data and to treat this as more of an exploratory tool than some kind of definitive trend explanation.
Well, how much do things depend on this particular, Gaussian
Yes, that's right.
You wanted to-
That's right. Well, we have a constant variance parameter there, so that's
right.
why it's happening.
But I mean, could you, how much flexibility do you have in that topic shift model? I mean, if computation was no issue whatsoever, right? I mean, I'm sure we could
Yeah.
have something that would permit us to also have arbitrary jumps in.
Yeah, that would be the idea. Yeah.
But, I mean, since you haven't really told us very much about the actual computational method,
Yes.
you can't really say whether that would be tractable or not. Right?
Well, I wouldn't even be able to say that in this context either. I mean, that would be defining a new model, and then we'd have to look at the details of that model to see what obstacles to posterior inference there might be. But yeah, it's true. This is, I think, the thing to relax at this stage here, or the merge splitting idea that you, yeah, yeah. I mean, this is modeling, so it's totally untrue, our assumptions of the model, but are useful to some degree, and to some degree are not useful, and that's, if this is a problem for your kind of interpretation, then you'd want to fix that aspect. But it would be more complicated than this simple Gaussian model, certainly.
Could you do some sort of iterative relaxation on the longitudinal connections between the models? So say you start with this model, you estimate the posterior probabilities for the topic mixture on each document, and then you can re-estimate the probabilities of word given topic based on the observations. And since there's 0 occurrences of relativity in 1900, that re-estimation of those distributions is going to drag that down.
I see. So, well, but that's actually kind of how it works, is by estimating the topic proportions and then re-estimating these distributions based on that. But it still needs to account for this. I don't see how that would...
No, but I'm saying you start off with the tight connection year to year.
Yeah. And then slowly relax it. So this gives you that initial signal. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. So that, right, the intuition, I mean, you've got the intuition there. You need to have that tight connection in order to find the structure to begin with. If you make it too loose, then it doesn't give the model any reason to say that topic 5 in 1955 is similar to topic 5 in 1954. And
I mean, this is a classic problem with edge detection. You're somehow trying to find a sharp rise.
yeah,
And any kind of, linear system is probably going to smooth out the corners.
yeah,
I don't see how you can avoid that without there's got to be a time frequency trade-off. You just can't win.
yeah. I mean, and which suggests going to some kind of model of word occurrence, say, for the first time, that would then allow. So I've been thinking lately of a model that just says, okay, it can start, and then once it starts, once you see it the first time, then it either dissipates or goes up and down to the end. But giving a word a distinct starting point.
This is sort of like the OED's model of the first citation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
For these charts, could you just show how often relativity, the word relativity appears that year?
Yeah, I should do that.
Weighted by things, whether they're theoretical physics?
Yes.
Well, that
The
was
word
based
must
on
have been
the-
used in another sense before 1930.
Right, right. But that would be interesting anyway, to also to see this kind of oxygen situation. But
I
yeah.
wonder also whether you get sort of periods of greater and lesser change. I was thinking, when Ken was talking about, in speech, they do dynamic time warping,
Mhm.
in effect, sort of allowing more slices at certain periods of time. And then
Right, that would be changing that sigma actually to
That's
have
right.
its own process.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
The alpha's changed during the year, right?
No, the alpha stays the same. Alpha is the prior probability on the topic proportions. And that doesn't really affect the inference very much. Yeah. It controls the sparsity in a sense, but we fit it and we keep it constant, and it hasn't really changed our inference very much. But if you changed alpha, then you could determine how popular topics were over time. And that might be interesting as well. Yeah. Okay, so let's skip some of these. And anytime you put up one of those charts, it will, I mean, it's good discussion, but let's go moving on a little bit. So I'm saying that we need to be cautious about interpreting these things, so what are they good for? Well, they're good for computing, for using this latent structure to compute something that we care about, like the similarity between documents. So one thing we can do is consider the expected Hellinger distance between topic proportions of two documents. So here's document I and document J, and each of these documents has their own histogram of topic proportions. And we can ask how similar are those histograms using the Hellinger distance. Now, why is this interesting? Well, we're using the latent structure to define similarity, but what's interesting about this is that time has been factored out, because if I'm a document in 1910 and you're a document in 1930, then the 50 topics that you have combined via theta are different from the 50 topics that I combined via theta. But we know that those topics are connected to each other through the time series process from 1910 to 1930. And so this is asking how similar are two documents to each other, factoring out the notion of how their underlying topics changed in the years between when they occurred. So here's an example. This article is called The Brain of the Arang. It's from 1880. And basically, it's about a guy who found an orang, bumped it on the head, and opened its head, and drew what he saw. Okay? And you can see that here. You don't need to read it. Now, this is the expected posterior proportions, the posterior topic proportions. So this is posterior inference using the topics of 1880, what combined to form this document. Now, in all of the 130,000 documents, the most similar document to this one is representation, oh, it's usually here. Oh, there it is. Representation of the visual field on the medial wall of the occipital parietal cortex in the owl monkey, which is essentially about exactly the same thing. In 1976, somebody went out, they bumped the occipital parietal monkey on the brain, and they opened it up, and they drew what they saw. And when you look at the posterior topic proportions, they're, of course, very similar to this. Now, the language of neuroscience between 1880 and 1976 has completely changed. It's a completely different set of words. But nonetheless, it's found these arguably similar articles to be very highly connected. And so this kind of similarity is a very useful application of this kind of latent structure. And what we've done is actually we've built kind of a prototype browser of all of science that lets you connect an original article. So here's an article by Salton about summarization of machine-readable texts. And we can look at what topics it's about. So this is about library science and computer science, and then some weird topic that has 2, 3, 4 different and single in it. Doesn't matter. But we can also look at what documents are similar to it. And if you look, you see something like global text matching for information retrieval, which is a reasonable similar document, also by Salton and Buckley. But that's what, of course, that you could find with many, many much simpler text analysis algorithms from the 80s and 90s. But you also find this article from 1962, Simple and Rapid Method for the Coding of Punch Cards, which is about encoding the information of documents, authors, and subjects on a punch card in the 60s. And you also find this article from 1899 called The Storing of Pamphlets, which is about how you've got pamphlets all over your office and you need a place to put them. And basically it says to buy a box. It's like extremely, I was so excited and I read it, and then I thought, you know, we were all born 100 years too late. We could have been going wild in science 100 years ago. But so this kind of these kinds of connections wouldn't be found with a conventional information retrieval algorithm from the 80s or the 90s. These require going through this latent structure and understanding how the words changed over time. Okay, let me see so I think we're out of time. So I'm going to, what's that? Okay, I'm going to skip all this. All right. So just to summarize this dynamic topic model, this is a hierarchical model of sequential document collections. Exchangeability assumptions should be taken seriously when you're playing this game of inferring latent structure in a hierarchical model. When you look at that LDA model, you don't just see that exchangeability assumption, but it really makes a difference in this kind of analysis. The large-scale posterior inference is really thanks to variational methods. Examining the latent structure yields useful browsing tools, but there are some open issues. One is choosing the number of topics, because here the non-parametric Bayesian machinery can't be immediately applied. And two, what are the hidden assumptions in variational inference? This is the general problem that I alluded to earlier when you're trying to decide between MCMC and variational inference. Okay, so as a last quick extension of the LDA model, I want to talk about correlated topic models quickly. So the Dirichlet is the prior distribution that we put on those topic proportions, and it's an exponential family distribution on the simplex. However, the Dirichlet makes an assumption that the components are nearly independent. So the probability, the geology topic component is nearly independent of the meteorology component. And this doesn't really make sense in the context of topic modeling, where topics might have correlation in terms of how often they appear. And so what we've done in the correlated topic model is use this same logistic normal distribution, only one where we have a full covariance matrix. So you draw a multivariate Gaussian over the number of topics, but you posit a full k by k covariance matrix, which lets topics co-occur in a sense. It means if I'm likely to see an article about genetics, I'm also likely to see an article about computer science. And then you can play the same game with LDA. So here's the model. It's exactly the same as the LDA model. The Greek letter changed, and instead of coming from a Dirichlet with hyperparameter alpha, this now comes from a logistic normal with a full covariance matrix on the topics. Okay, and the challenge here again is that this loses conjugacy between eta and z. Okay, so again, as a useful summary of a lot of data and finding structure in a lot of unstructured data, we can now use this to create a map of the topic. So instead of 50 topics being just sitting out in space, they're now connected by those topics that have high correlation with each other. So you can see sun and solar wind is correlated to this stuff about earthquakes and this stuff about the environment. Over here we have our genetics topics all correlated with each other. Here we have research and education correlated with each other. And again, it's just another useful summary that actually JSTOR, the people that we're working with on this stuff, is very interested in using, because they want people to be able to browse their collections in the same way that they browse a well-curated electronic journal today. Only there's no metadata in 1880, so they need to appeal to these kinds of techniques. Something else I was going to say about this, but yeah. So a point of interest, this is a very sparse covariance matrix, and we don't do maximum likelihood estimation of the covariance matrix. We actually use this trick from Buhlmann and Meinchhausen, who use basically the L1 regularization to find sparse covariance matrices. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a nice use of this L1 trick, and it really works well. Okay. So to conclude, topic models, I hope I've convinced you, provide useful descriptive statistics for understanding the hidden structure in large text collections. And more generally, probabilistic graphical models are a useful way to express our assumptions about some data in terms of their hidden structure. Variational methods, which I know I didn't talk about in great detail, allow us to do these kinds of large-scale posterior inference problems. And we should all be aware that models come with hidden assumptions, such as exchangeability and component-wise independence. So finally, I recently read this paper by John Tukey called The Future of Data Analysis, and I really love this quote. I won't read it out loud, but please read it. It's really a great quote, and it resonated for me in terms of where I think this research is useful and what I think we're doing. And the models are wrong, but we are uncovering the hidden assumptions they make and trying to go deeper into the data this way. So that's it. Thanks. Any other questions? This is nice. Yeah.
Just explain a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
No, actually not.
Oh.
I was going to say the correlated.
Oh, sure.
The correlated topics.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, this is where we're picking the topic proportions. Is
Mm-hmm.
that what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So we're sort of saying.
Yeah. So basically, so here's how it works. So before we had this logistic normal on the topics. Okay. now, and the logistic normal is a distribution over the simplex. But this is another simplicial vector here, the topic proportions. And so what we do is we put a logistic normal here, and this logistic normal, the logistic normal on the topics was diagonal covariance matrix, right? Each word had its own trajectory through time. Here, this is the topic proportions histogram. We place a full covariance matrix on it. Okay, so instead of drawing from a Dirichlet, we draw from a multivariate Gaussian. We get a k vector, positive and negative, exponentiate it, and map to the simplex to get our distribution over topics. However, the difference is that that k vector came from this process where the different components are correlated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if one topic is likely to be wrong, you're likely to also get the other one.
Exactly. So what this means is that if I see the astronomy topic here, by the way, these topics are, the size is proportional to how often they occurred in the collection. So if I see the astronomy topic here, then I'm likely to also see the sun, earth, planets, solar, wind topic.
So you also have a negative correlation, right?
They could also have negative. This is positive correlation here. Yeah. And this actually results in a better fit of the data and, interestingly, less sensitivity to the number of topics, because when you increase the number of topics, you simply find more correlation between those topics and you can fit the data almost as well. Of course, you need enough data to find that correlation, but that's easier because you're doing this in a much smaller space. Yeah, Paul?
Have you looked at the entropy of the topic distribution for each document length versus the document length of these two models?
I haven't looked at that. That's a good idea. I mean, in general, I haven't, and I don't know of people that have explored this sensitivity to document length enough. It's a really interesting, I mean, you brought this up already. It would be interesting to explore. These models, a long document has undue influence on these topic distributions. There's no notion of normalizing for document length. And there might be a relationship there between entropy of the topic proportions and document length.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.